The NBA news continues to pour in, and if you're a Knicks fan, you woke up to some positive news. According to multiple sources, point guard Kemba Walker has agreed to a contract buyout with the Oklahoma City Thunder and plans to sign with the New York Knicks. Here to talk to us more about the huge signing is Bleacher Report writer Jake Fischer. But before we dive into the Knicks, Jake's new book titled Built to Lose: How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever is out now. You can get it on Amazon, Triumph Books, Barnes and Nobles, and everywhere else you get your stories. Jake, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me, Yaw. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with this. Clearly, a priority for the Knicks this offseason was re-signing their key pieces, right? They re-upped Taj Gibson, Alec Burks, Nerlens Noel, and Derrick Rose, but reports suggest that they were still on a hunt for that starting caliber all-star point guard. Can you talk to me about how this reported deal with Kemba Walker came together?
Yeah, I mean, the Knicks clearly had a hole in terms of, leading, playmaking, ball creation off the dribble. And I think that was honestly the biggest reason why they fell short against Atlanta in the first round, right? So they got Derrick Rose back on a high number, which, was important, being that the Chicago Bulls clearly had interest in bringing him to Chicago back for a hometown reunion. So they did what they had to do to get Derrick Rose, but that limited them flexibility wise in terms of with money left to spend. And I think with Kemba Walker being amenable to going back to New York, there was there needed to be a contract buyout, obviously, with Oklahoma City, and that's not something that the Thunder typically do. They do not typically let guys out of their contracts. It's just a trend down with Sam Presti in their front office down there. So clearly there was a lot of motivation to get this done. I don't know specifics on the numbers, but I would imagine that the Thunder saved a pretty penny on that contract, and I think Kemba's amenable, being that it sounds like he's going to get around $8 million from New York, and if his knees are healthy, if he's able to perform well in that type of environment on that stage, and the Garden that kind of set his career to be what it was, that cardiac Kemba moment back.
Yeah.
Maybe he gets back into free agency next year and can make some more money.
That was one of the more surprising parts, the fact that the Thunder agreed to a buyout. Usually, they would probably trade a player of Kemba's caliber for a first-round pick. And when you look at what Kemba Walker brings, we're talking about a when healthy box office player who can create his own shot from anywhere on the court. Was this move made with the mindset that Kemba can alleviate a lot of the offensive pressure that Julius Randle and RJ Barrett had to take on?
Absolutely, but I think the knees and the health are going to be a huge factor here. I think part of the reason why this deal happened, I mean, Oklahoma City definitely, from what I was hearing from sources around the league, they definitely had motivations to try to trade him before the season started, and they were hoping to receive some type of draft capital or younger pieces back in return. The fact that they came to this contract buyout, I think that suggests they probably were not as bullish on that coming to fruition as they thought. And that probably would have been due to the medical information about his knees. Now, I haven't seen the x-rays or anything like that. But I think that's a factor that needs to be considered here moving forward. As much as this is a big win for New York. To get Kemba Walker at that number, $8 million, is an absolute steal. But it will only be a steal if he's healthy enough to be on the floor.
And that's where I was going to go next. You reported that the Knicks plan to offer Kemba a contract worth roughly around $8 million a year, as you mentioned before. We're talking about a player who averaged 22 points on 43% shooting for the past 3 seasons. Is the Knicks front office expecting Kemba to take such a large pay cut because he wants to play for his hometown team, or maybe because it's a tradable contract? What is the thinking surrounding that number?
I don't think they have any designs to trade him. I think it's the hometown situation. He also, from everything I heard, had no interest in playing in Oklahoma City this year. And I think, with the way the NBA is at right now, we're seeing these contract numbers come out where Norm Powell's signing for 5 years, $90 million, and Duncan Robinson's getting the same. And on the even grander scale, you see Trae Young signing a $200 million extension, and John Collins getting 125 over 5. I think that's NBA players want to put themselves in a situation that they're comfortable living in that city and those teammates that they like and all that type of stuff, but they also want to be in a spot where they can perform and show what they can do for their next contract. That is a huge motivation for a lot of people around the league. And I think when you consider all those factors, just like we talked about before, with Kemba being from New York, obviously those special moments at the Garden back in college, I think the chance to get to a playoff environment rather than playing for Oklahoma City, all those factors clearly aligned here.
$8 million a year for an all-star caliber player. It certainly seems like a fantastic deal for any team. And the fact that the Knicks are getting Kemba at that number, or reportedly are getting Kemba for that number, that is phenomenal to me. And there's no doubt that the Knicks have a competitive roster, right? But when you look at Brooklyn, Milwaukee, Philly, Miami, Atlanta, and now it seems like Chicago, do the Knicks have enough to make some more noise in the Eastern Conference?
It's going to be difficult. It's the Eastern Conference is not going to be the cakewalk that people have viewed it as in the past couple of years. I don't think Atlanta is going away. Obviously, Chicago made some massive moves, but we'll have to see. How those pieces fit with the Bulls is going to be interesting. Can Atlanta, after guys got paid and people come back and there's more expectations, like can they continue to do so? The whole Philadelphia equation is interesting with Ben Simmons, of course. Boston is still floating around, and then the Nets' health concerns are real. So I think every team has either a fatal flaw or question marks. So that's why I think also you're seeing all these teams pushing their chips in the middle and trying to make a run here. Because across the league, we saw Phoenix trade for Chris Paul, Milwaukee trade for Jrue Holiday, and both teams made the finals. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now in the NBA. Everyone around the league who has ideals and designs on competing, they think they're only one move away, and a lot of teams feel like they've made their move right now.
So in the talks that you've had, is the Knicks front office, when you look at Leon Rose, Worldwide West, are they satisfied with the moves they've made so far? Are they looking at their team and saying, we need that one other piece to take us over the hump to make probably an Eastern Conference Finals run?
I don't think they have much more room to do anything, to be honest. I think Kemba was the last move, the last trick up their sleeve. And from looking around Twitter and from talking around the league right now, I think the Knicks are feeling good about themselves. I think, this was a move that on the surface came out of left field. I started hearing wind of it last night, but I also don't think it was, their plans all along. I think it came together in the last 48 hours or so. I could be wrong. I don't know that for sure, but that's the sense I've gotten. I don't think it was, maybe it was something that these teams have talked about, preliminarily, but I think in terms of it, like moving from 0 to 100 and actually being completed, I think it moved very quickly.
I think the biggest thing to look at when it comes to the Knicks this offseason is how many team-friendly contracts were signed. And I don't want to speculate, but if a disgruntled star, we've seen it in the past few months, if a disgruntled star were to come to New York, how hesitant do you think, if at all, would the front office be to pull the trigger with all the assets that they currently have?
I don't think they'd be hesitant at all. I'm assuming you're alluding to Damian Lillard. If someone like Damian Lillard or Bradley Beal did become available, if they did request a trade, if they were on the open market for trade, New York, Philadelphia, Toronto, Golden State, any team down the list, New Orleans, that has assets, that has pieces at play here, that has an idea and a design to win, they would absolutely line up and try to trade for them.
And finally, before I let you go, your book, Built to Lose, tackles the inner workings of creating a winning franchise, right? From secret pre-draft workouts to power struggles to public relation fiascos and much more. When you look back at how you covered the Knicks in your book, how did all of those factors lead to the emergence of New York basketball that the world is seeing now?
Well, one interesting detail is that Andy Miller at the time was Kristaps Porzingis' agent in the 2015 draft, and he did everything he could to steer Kristaps Porzingis to the New York Knicks. And by doing, he lied to Sam Hinkie. He, refused to let Hinkie meet with him, and in doing so, that obviously brought Porzingis to the Garden and to New York, and then allowed the Knicks to one day trade him to Dallas to get back these assets, to get the roster flexibility to make these moves. And I think that's kind of how team building works behind the scenes. Like, you have your plan A, and unforeseen variables are going to pop up. Players are going to want to request a trade. Your head coach is going to be someone who you hired to be your leader and your this visionary person and someone who's got great relationships. And turns out he might not be that guy. And you got to pivot and react quickly and continue to try to move yourself forward, inching closer to that title. And that's clearly, I'm not saying the Knicks are a title contender, but that's clearly what they've done in the last 3 years.
This was Bleacher Report writer Jake Fischer. Once again, Jake's new book titled Built to Lose: How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever is out now. It's a must read. It's going to go to the top of the charts if it hasn't already. And you can get it on Amazon, Triumph Books, Barnes & Nobles, and everywhere else you get your stories. It's a must read. Jake, thank you for the time.
Thank you, man. Have a good one.